From stunt doubles and rubber hammers to broken rings and camera tricks, these are the secrets behind WWE's wildest moments. Starting with the trick behind the Buried Alive match. For over 2 decades, the Buried Alive match was one of the most feared stipulations in WWE history. These matches would often feature Kane or The Undertaker and would be used to put an end to heated rivalries. As the name suggests, to win the match, you have to bury your opponent alive, and that's where things get tricky. How does the wrestler survive being buried 6 feet under without actually suffocating? The answer is actually genius. First, the grave is always built on what looks like a hill, which allows WWE to dig it incredibly deep without actually going underground. But here's where it gets clever. The walls around the grave actually have trapdoors. When the wrestler falls into the grave, they'll crawl into a hidden room behind the trapdoor before dirt starts pouring in. This is exactly how The Undertaker was able to survive being buried alive multiple times and still came back to get his revenge. But switching gears from the Buried Alive match, let's talk about a segment that traumatized an entire generation. In 2007, the Great Khali squeezed Rey Mysterio's head so hard that blood started pouring from Rey's mouth. The segment was so horrific that kids were actually crying and fans were legit concerned about Mysterio's safety. So how did WWE pull this off? Well, before Khali destroyed Rey, a crew member discreetly handed Mysterio a small blood capsule. Inside that capsule was a mixture of corn syrup, flour, and red food coloring, the same fake blood recipe Hollywood has used for decades. Rey placed it in his right hand, and then, just before Khali grabbed the sides of Rey's head for the spot, Mysterio subtly slipped the capsule into his mouth. When Rey bit down on the capsule at the perfect moment, the red liquid poured out of his mouth, making it look like the Great Khali was literally crushing his skull and causing internal bleeding. WWE has used this same trick multiple times during brawls and beatdowns to make them appear more violent. But while Rey was getting crushed, Kurt Angle was being thrown off a balcony. In 2004, The Big Show chokeslammed Kurt Angle off a balcony on SmackDown, and it legit looked like Kurt Angle had just died on live television. But here's the trick. To make the landing safe, WWE had a crash pad laid out on the floor that was completely out of the camera's frame. After Angle landed, WWE removed the crash pad and applied fake blood behind his head to make it look like he'd hit concrete. The entire thing was a masterclass in camera work and timing, but how does a wrestler survive being set on fire? The Inferno match is simple. You win by setting your opponent on fire. This stipulation often features the Big Red Machine Kane, who once revealed exactly how wrestlers avoid getting burned despite the fire being 100% real. During the first ever Inferno match between The Undertaker and Kane, Kane's right sleeve was replaced with a special sleeve made entirely of flame-retardant material. Then they applied cooling gel mixed with an accelerant all over Kane's right arm. WWE used this exact method again 8 years later when Kane fought MVP in another Inferno match. Once both men were outside the ring, MVP crawled under the ring, and a production member rapidly applied cooling gel to his back. Then, almost immediately after MVP was pulled back out, Kane pushed him toward the fire and MVP's back was engulfed in flames. But even with all these safety measures, it's still incredibly dangerous. One wrong move or one missed spot with the gel, and someone could get seriously burned. But while Kane was setting his opponents on fire, his big brother was trapping them inside caskets. One of The Undertaker's signature matches was the Casket match. During his intense rivalry with Randy Orton in 2005, the Legend Killer trapped the dead man inside a casket and set it on fire as the whole thing got engulfed in flames. So how did WWE do this without actually burning Taker alive? Well, the casket actually had a secret compartment that could be pushed out from the inside. Since the casket was positioned right next to the ring apron, once Undertaker pushed the padding out, he simply rolled under the ring to safety. Randy and his father then proceeded to push the casket up the ramp and set it on fire. By the time the casket was fully engulfed in flames, The Undertaker was already chilling under the ring. But switching gears from the supernatural stuff, let's talk about the bizarre world of WWE hand signals. WWE referees are some of the most fragile beings on the planet. One light push is enough to keep them down for ages while the entire world descends into chaos around them. However, these refs aren't just there to count to 3. They're actually running an entire secret communication network right in front of your eyes. The most important signal every fan should know is the X sign. When a wrestler gets legitimately injured during a match, the referee will immediately throw up an X. This tells the doctors and medical staff that they need to get down to the ring immediately because someone is actually hurt. But before throwing up the X sign, referees will first try to check on the wrestler discreetly. They'll crouch down, pretend to talk to them. But what they're actually doing is putting their hand in the wrestler's palm. If the wrestler squeezes the referee's hand, that means they're okay and the match can continue. If the wrestler doesn't squeeze, or if the injury is obviously severe, the ref immediately throws up the X. But the X sign isn't the only secret signal wrestlers and referees use. When a wrestler is about to hit a DDT, they need to tell their opponent whether to take the move or counter it. If the wrestler executing the DDT slaps their opponent's back, it means take the move, and no slap means counter it. But while wrestlers communicate through slaps and hand squeezes, let's talk about how WWE manipulates the arena to make their shows feel larger than life. WWE's pyro isn't what you think it is. When you hear those massive explosions during wrestler entrances, what you're actually hearing is a combination of real pyro and a secret audio trick. The fireworks and flames you see are 100% real, but the massive explosion sound you hear, that's coming from something called concussion pyro. Concussion pyro doesn't create any visual explosions, it just makes an incredibly loud noise. WWE sets off concussion pyro at the exact same time as the visual pyro, which creates that earth-shattering boom that makes everything feel epic. This is what gives the extra magic to the entrances of wrestlers like Kane, Batista, Goldberg, and Edge. But the audio manipulation doesn't stop at pyro. WWE has a sound amplifier sitting under the ring. They use audio equipment so that every time a wrestler hits the mat, the impact sounds way more devastating than it actually is. Without that amplifier, a body slam would just be a dull thud. With it, every move sounds like someone just got hit by a truck. But moving from audio tricks to visual illusions, did you know that this microphone is actually useless? Every backstage interview you've ever seen in WWE features an interviewer holding a microphone, asking questions to wrestlers who respond into that same microphone. Except none of that is real. The microphone the interviewer is holding is just a prop. It's not actually picking up any audio. The real sound is being captured by a boom mic that's held above the frame, completely out of the camera's view. The prop just looks better visually. It gives the interviewer something to do with their hands and makes the segment look more professional. But why does literally every wrestler wet their hair before walking through the curtain? The first reason is simple: aura farming. Wet hair simply looks cooler than dry and frizzy hair. But the second reason is all about wrestling psychology. Dry hair just kind of sits there. Wet hair tells a story. When someone takes a move, their wet hair whips around violently, making the impact look way more devastating. This is why wrestlers always have drenched hair to enhance the visual impact of every single move. But speaking of preparation, let's talk about one of the most visually brutal moves in WWE history that required perfect timing to execute safely. Edge and Christian created one of the most devastating-looking moves in WWE history, the Con Chair Toe. 2 steel chairs, 1 victim's head. Absolute carnage. Except the move never actually touched anyone's head, and the secret to pulling it off safely is all about angles and timing. Instead of hitting the opponent's head, they aim for the tops of the chairs to hit each other behind the opponent's head. When executed correctly, the chairs create a gap between them that keeps the opponent completely safe. The sound of the 2 steel chairs smashing together creates a loud, brutal crash that sells the impact. The camera angle is absolutely critical here. When shot from the correct side, the Con Chair Toe looks like the most vicious thing ever. But from the wrong angle, it's painfully obvious that the chairs never made contact with the person's head. But moving on from dangerous chair shots, let's talk about broken rings. On an episode of Raw in 2017, Braun Strowman hit a superplex on the Big Show from the top rope, and the entire ring collapsed beneath them. But obviously this was completely planned, and the secret behind how they pulled it off is actually wild. Before the match even started, WWE had airbags hidden under the ring. Once Strowman and Big Show climbed to the top rope, the airbags underneath were inflated just enough to raise that section of the ring slightly off the ground. This means the ring posts weren't actually holding up the ring anymore. The airbags were. When Braun hit the superplex and both men crashed down, the impact caused the ring posts to flip over. Then, immediately after the impact, the production team deflated the airbags, causing the entire ring to fall straight down to the arena floor. The crash pads inside the ring absorbed most of the impact for Braun and Big Show, but it was still a brutal landing. This is the same trick WWE used when Big Show and Lesnar broke the ring in 2003 and when Mark Henry broke the ring at Vengeance. But moving on from broken rings, let's talk about one of the most dangerous weapons in WWE history. The sledgehammer is synonymous with Triple H. The game used it throughout his entire career, and it became his signature weapon for destroying opponents. But here's what most fans don't know. Triple H didn't always use a real sledgehammer. When he first started incorporating the sledgehammer into his character in 1999, WWE gave him a fake one with a rubber head attached to a real wooden handle. This allowed him to swing it at people without causing serious damage. The only time Triple H would use a real sledgehammer was when he was smashing inanimate objects like tables and announce desks. But later on in his career, the game switched to using a real sledgehammer to hit his opponents, but with a special technique. Whenever he hit someone with the sledgehammer, he would always cup his hand over the metal head. His hand absorbed the impact, preventing any serious damage. But what's up with the misty thing Asuka spits in her opponent's face? Wrestlers like Tajiri and Asuka have used the mist for decades, and it always looks devastating. They spray a cloud of mysterious green poison into their opponent's face, temporarily blinding them and turning the tide of the match. So what exactly is the green mist, and how do wrestlers shoot it out of their mouths? The answer is surprisingly simple. It's just water mixed with food coloring. The mist doesn't hurt at all. The wrestler taking it just has to pretend their face is burning and sell the move like they've been hit with acid. But the real trick is how the mist gets into the wrestler's mouth in the first place. Usually right before the spot, the referee will discreetly hand the wrestler a small capsule filled with the green liquid similar to a blood capsule. The capsule is designed to dissolve quickly in the wrestler's mouth, and when the timing is right, the wrestler bites down and sprays the mist. The spray technique itself takes practice. Wrestlers have to learn how to build up pressure in their mouths and spray the mist in a way that creates a dramatic cloud effect rather than just dribbling colored water down their chin. But moving from harmless food coloring to weapons that could actually cause serious damage, let's talk about barbed wire. Barbed wire has always been controversial because it looks legitimately dangerous and fans are never quite sure if it's real or fake. But the truth is, it depends. The company uses both real barbed wire and fake barbed wire, depending on the situation and the wrestlers involved. When they use fake barbed wire, the tips are made of rubber instead of metal. This means wrestlers can get thrown into it, tangled up in it, or wrapped around it without actually getting cut or stabbed. The rubber tips look real enough on camera, especially with the right lighting and camera angles, but they can't pierce skin. However, some wrestlers, like Mick Foley, have insisted on using genuine barbed wire for maximum effect. But barbed wire wasn't the only weapon that caused controversy because of how real it was. At the 2001 King of the Ring, Kurt Angle and Shane McMahon had one of the most brutal street fights in WWE history. Towards the end, the plan was for Kurt Angle to suplex Shane through sheets of glass. The glass was supposed to be fake, the kind WWE always uses for stunts. But someone made a catastrophic mistake. When Kurt Angle threw Shane into the glass, it didn't break. Shane's head bounced off the solid glass and slammed into the concrete floor below. They had accidentally used plexiglass instead of sugar glass. Kurt had to hit the move once again to get the glass to break. And kudos to Shane McMahon for telling Kurt to throw him through the glass again. Being Vince's son, he seriously didn't need to do all the crazy spots he did for the love of the game. But that's what made fans love the prodigal son, and that's why his returns always get a loud pop. But speaking of returns, WWE has a special system to keep their returns secret. When a wrestler is scheduled to make a surprise return, only a very small group of people are informed beforehand. On the day of the show, the returning wrestler isn't allowed anywhere near the normal locker room. Instead, they're hidden in a trailer or production truck in the parking lot until it's time for their entrance. This is why you'll sometimes see wrestlers looking genuinely shocked when someone returns, because they literally had no idea it was happening. AJ Styles' Royal Rumble debut, the Hardy Boys' WrestleMania return, and Edge's return at the 2020 Royal Rumble are perfect examples of this. And speaking of returns, check out this video next about the most loved versus the most hated returns in WWE history.